again, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Sportsbook Confidential here at the FingerLakes1.com studios in Seneca Falls, New York. And this little show here is to help you learn and grow as a sports bettor. And before we get started, I just want to mention, if you can see right down at the bottom there, that you can call in the show anytime and leave us a nice voicemail. It's 866-315-FLX1, and our show is extension 810. And please remember, if you do leave a message, that we may play it on the air. So if you have any questions, comments, feedback, topic ideas, general tomfoolery, we'll be happy to listen to what you have to say. So let's get started with the program. And as we always do, we start by updating the bankroll. And if you take a look here, I ended last week at $664. So that's how we started this week. And I had 6 plays. And you know I try to be selective. And I left the show last week and I said I feel like I made too many plays. And I lost on my bowl pick, the SU West Virginia game. I still feel like that was the right play, but it basically came down to Syracuse made adjustments they needed to win, and West Virginia did not. So that was minus $22. Last Friday, we had the Maple Leafs minus 1.5 goals, and that won us a $43 profit. And then on Saturday in the college football playoffs, we had Oklahoma covering at plus 14, and that earned us a $21 profit. And then on the NFL weekend, we had the Bears over, which the Vikings were very disappointing in that game. Didn't happen. Minus 22. The Texans minus 6.5. That pretty much went as we expected. Jacksonville is a team in disarray, and a lot of people are calling for them to make major changes this offseason. And then the Eagles and Redskins over failed us. The Eagles did their part, but the Redskins didn't score any points. So that was minus 22. If you do the math, we made a profit of $18. And that gives us a new bankroll of $682 going forward. So even though I went 3-3, I managed to turn a profit. And as we divide by 30, we are adjusting our bet size, and our new bet size is going to be $23 going forward. So we're still underwater since the beginning of the show, but we are steadily moving in the right direction, and I'm pleased with that. So new year, and since we are moving on from the NFL regular season, we are going to have a new sportsbook lesson today. And what I've decided to do is I've decided to look at certain statistics, and we're going to kind of use all of them together down the line as we eventually are going to get to talking about models and model building. And that's kind of more the math geeky side of things for sports bettors. I think everybody needs to know a little bit about it. But to keep things simple, we're just going to cover one metric at a time and have you learn about different ways you can look at stats to determine, to use the stats to help make a wager. And today's stat we're going to look at is called points per possession, or PPP for short. And this metric is used mostly in basketball and football. And it's exactly what it says it is. For each time you possess the ball, how many points do you score? In basketball, where you get lots of possessions a game and you score a lot of points, it's more of a mark of how efficient your offense is. It's the same for football too, but in football, you only get anywhere from 8 to 12 possessions a game, in an NFL game, and there's a variance in there since there's not a large sample size of possessions in each game. It can your points per possession can vary greatly, and so I made an example here, a football example. It says the Steelers average 9% possessions per game. I just made this stat up. I didn't use the actual stat. Didn't have time to look it up today, but and they average 22.5 points per game. So that would equal, if you do the math there, 2.5 points per possession. So now that would be on the offensive side of the ball. You can also calculate points per possession allowed by the defensive side of the ball, and you can use that to measure how efficient a defense is. You have to keep in mind certain things, whether or not you've included special teams points. If the defense, they will give up field goals, do you include that in there, or it's personal choice? Do you include that in there, or do you not? If they give up punt return, kickoff return touchdowns, do you include that in there, or do you not? That's up to you. Now in basketball, it's straight up offense and defense all the time. So some of the smarter people in handicapping basketball that I know believe or consider offensive points per possession, we're talking basketball here, more relevant to handicapping. It's the common theme is, or the logic behind it is, that mostly defense does not win championships in basketball as opposed to offense for the most part. I know people will disagree with that statement, but a good example would be the University of Virginia is known for having very good defensive teams, basketball teams, and their scores are often very low. But for some reason, teams like that have not had great success winning the NCAA tournament, and the best defensive teams do not always win in the NBA. It's usually the stronger offensive teams that seem to do better, that play both offense and defense well, are the teams that do the best in pro basketball. So a lot of people just measure offensive points per possession when they're handicapping a game. You can go in a deep a dive as you want, but I find that this is something that is used by sports bettors quite a lot in the basketball world, and offensive points per possession are used effectively to handicap totals. And the example I have there is first quarter NBA totals. Now, when you bet a total, which is known as an over-under, it's usually for the whole game. But you can also bet for the first half or the second half only, or first quarter, fourth quarter only. Sometimes they offer all four quarters. I'm not really sure, but I know that there's some pretty smart guys that like to bet NBA first quarters over-unders because they can calculate points per possession, and in the first quarter of an NBA game, the starters usually play the majority of the first quarter, about 9 to 12 minutes, depending which team. So it's a pretty accurate, simple measurement to measure the over-under on the first quarter of an NBA game. So that is it for points per possession, as I spelled possession wrong at the top of the screen there. But the one of many metrics we'll talk about in the coming weeks, something to think about as you handicap both basketball and football going forward. So with our sportsbook lesson under the belt, let's start with the Friday NHL games. And we got a big schedule in the NHL. I'm going to try to go through these really quickly. The NHL is playing a lot of games every night because they have their 8 to 9 day All-Star break coming up, I think, in the next couple of weeks. And let's start with the Jets at the Penguins. And Winnipeg Jets are one of the better teams in the West, and the Penguins have been rolling lately. I'm a little wary of this game. I feel like it might be a trap game because the Jets have played so bad recently. And the Penguins always seem to kind of, after a couple of big road wins, they always seem to kind of slack off at home. I'm going to stay away from that game, but I lean towards the Penguins there. The Blue Jackets at the Hurricanes. Hurricanes on a back-to-back. Their goaltending has me staying away from them. It's this game are two teams that are just not consistent enough. If I had to choose one side, I guess I'd take the plus money, but another one I'm staying away from. And then the Predators at the Red Wings. Red Wings have been competitive lately, but I think you're going to have to give me plus 200 or better for me to take a shot on them. The Preds are rolling, and, what can you say? That's kind of a lopsided game there. Capitals at the Stars, and the Stars had an interesting last couple of weeks with their owner calling their top two players out for underperforming. And you have the Capitals at plus money, and you know what that means for me because I like the Capitals a lot. So we'll see where that ends up, but obviously that's very attractive to me to take the Capitals. The Devils at the Coyotes. You got the Devils, who I think are generally an undervalued team, and I think they've solved their goaltending problems, but they're on a back-to-back. And the Coyotes, it depends on who the goaltenders are here, because the Coyotes have one goaltender that's performed really well and one that's performed really poorly. And I think I need a little more there to take the Devils in that game, so it's a pass for me. The Rangers at the Avalanche, and that number really spooks me. Rangers, I would take almost any NHL team at over plus 200, barring them missing, key players. The Rangers just, on a road trip, I'm not exactly sure if Varlamov is going to be back tonight or not for the Avalanche, but the Rangers number is attractive, but is it attractive enough? I don't know. Obviously the Avalanche are the better team here, but the Rangers are going to win their fair share of games. It's just do they give you enough payoff to make it worth the risk? I think that's a little short for me. And then finally you have the Golden Knights minus 126 at the Ducks, plus 114. I've talked about the Ducks being, again, an undervalued good team in the market, and they've had a couple of tough outings in the last week or so, but they have strong goaltending, and when they're fully healthy, they will be a force to be reckoned with. But I think that's worth a shot, getting plus money at home with the Ducks. So we'll see how it all ends up on my picks later on. But moving on, I'm going to do a new segment today, and I'm calling this Guess the Lines. And there's a lot of really great college basketball on Saturday. And the problem is the sportsbooks will not put out lines until probably this evening for tomorrow's games. I would say probably after 7 o'clock. Here on the East Coast. So I'm going to guess what I think the lines will be for these games on Saturday. And there's some really great matchups. Of course, you've got the Syracuse Orange visiting Notre Dame. And both of these teams are about in the same place this point of the season. They've had some really good games and some really bad games. And these two teams are considered to be in the bottom of the ACC, which shows you how deep the ACC is this year. I think that game is pretty evenly matched. You've got both teams like to run the ball. Syracuse plays that zone. If Notre Dame starts hitting threes from the outside, well, that'll change things. But I think you give Notre Dame the 3-point favorite basically because they're at home. There's not any reason to shorten that because Syracuse hasn't performed very well lately. Then you have number 7 Michigan State at number 12 Ohio State. And even though Ohio State only has one loss, it's in the national scene, it's considered that Michigan State is the better team. So considering not only is it a rivalry game and a conference game, but two very good teams, I'm going to make Ohio State a 2-point dog at home. Michigan State has had their number in recent years, so the coaches have been there a while. They know each other's styles. That should be a close game. We'll see how it ends up, but I think Michigan State is a short favorite there. And then St. John's at Georgetown. These are two names that you don't hear very often in marquee games, but both of these teams are playing excellent basketball. And not only that, but you have the coaches are two people that have met in the Final Four as players. You have Chris Mullen for St. John's and Patrick Ewing for Georgetown. So if they're as chippy as they were as players, it ought to be a very interesting game. And I have this as a pick. Both of these teams have taken care of business. Georgetown lost a tough one at Syracuse, but they played very well. And I feel like that's how I value this game, is these teams are very, very even. And so if St. John's ends up getting a bunch of points when the lines do come out, then that makes that a very attractive wager. Then you have number 9 Florida State at number 2 Virginia. Virginia is undefeated, and they're a very tough team to play. They play such good fundamental defense, and they're a good free throw shooting team. Florida State has to try to push tempo. They've got to run deep rotation, 9-10 guys. They have to tire the Virginia team out. That's how they're going to beat them. I like Virginia at home here. -5 I have it lined at. It's hard to say how Florida State's going to play this game. But if Florida State shoots cold and they play a half-court game, they're going to have, they shoot cold from outside. They have no chance in this game. We'll see where the line actually ends up, but that's how I have it. Number 6, Kansas at a very good Iowa State team, Big 12 conference opener there. And Kansas only has that one loss. They fell from number 1 to number 6. And Iowa State, I believe, only has 1 or 2 losses. This game is often very, very competitive. Iowa State has beaten Kansas there many times. I put Iowa State as a 6-point dog, but boy, that's a fighting dog there. If they do get 6-7 points, I would really like that bet. We will see. We will see what happens there. And then finally, tomorrow night or Saturday night, Clemson at number 1 Duke. I have Duke at -9, and Duke could easily win by 20. Clemson is not a pushover, but traditionally they have not been a run team. They play kind of a middling tempo, if that makes any sense. They do run time to time, but they like to run set plays. And Duke's going to get some home cooking like they always do, and they should win this game without issue. They've had very close games in the past, but I say Duke -9. It'll be interesting to see what the line is. I might be 12 or something like that. But those are my guesses, and you can check the lines tomorrow to see how close I was or how far off I was. But that's how I value the teams. That's if I was the bookmaker, that's where I would set the lines. And it is what it is. It's just for fun. But very interesting matchups tomorrow, and I hope we'll figure out a way to be able to handicap some Saturday and Sunday games for you. So let's move on to games we can bet, and we've got the wild card weekend in National Football League, the playoffs coming up here, and we have 4 games, 2 on Saturday, 2 on Sunday, and let's start with the Colts at the Texans. Texans 1-point favorite. And 48 points is the total. So I have to think that total is too high. I feel like that unless this game becomes a blowout where one team is trying to play catch-up, I think the over is pretty high here. So I lean towards the under. A lot of money on the Colts, 9-1 in their last 10, something along those lines. The Texans, I think that, it's somewhat of an evenly matched game. I feel like, obviously the turnovers are going to decide this game, but I feel like if Andrew Luck has the ball last and a decent amount of time to get them down the field, that they're going to take care of business. but the public is real heavy on the Colts. The public and professional better thing is it's the most heavily bet game on one side of the four, I should say. Which makes me wonder. But I think that game is a pass unless I take the under here. So we'll wait and see if that line moves. And then you've got the Seahawks and the Cowboys Saturday night. It's in Dallas. It's going to be indoors. Seahawks, I think, both of these teams are about the same. The Cowboys have played really well down the stretch, as has the Seahawks, but I feel like the Seahawks have played a much tougher schedule. They had a much more tougher set of games. They took care of business against the Chiefs. I like the Seahawks here, and if this line gets to 3, I would take the Seahawks plus 3. 43, it's kind of appropriate here. The Cowboys, it comes down to coaching for me. I don't trust Jason Garrett in the playoffs. Pete Carroll is more of a gambler, which I think gives you a little better EV. But I think head-to-head in that scenario, I would take Pete Carroll over Jason Garrett. You have two quarterbacks that are very similar. Russell Wilson also has more experience. I feel like the Seattle receivers are healthy for the first time pretty much all year. They have their almost their full complement of receivers. So Seahawks are looking very promising to me. We'll see where that ends up. Then on Sunday, you have the Chargers at the Ravens. Ravens -3. The total's 42. It seems like nobody can figure out this Ravens offense, but I feel like the Chargers, played them just a couple weeks ago, and they get them again. Even though it's in Baltimore, it's going to be Sunday afternoon, 1 o'clock. Good weather. It's supposed to be almost 50 degrees. I feel like the Chargers here are the play. Everybody, I think, is just ready to jump on the Ravens as a hot team, and they can't figure out, their rushing attack. And I feel like that San Diego has a little something left here. They have not. They had some drops the last couple of weeks. Melvin Gordon he had light duty coming back from his injury, so he's ready to lay it out on the line. I feel like the Chargers are the play here. If you like the Chargers, you have to like the over, because the Chargers are going to have to put up 24 points to win this game, at least 24 points, especially since their kicking always seems to let them down. But we'll see where that ends up on our sheet. And then the Eagles at the Bears, and this is the one that has me scratching my head the most. If this gets to 7 points, I think you have to take the Eagles plus 7. The Bears are playing great right now, but the Eagles, have been a team that has been do or die for 2 or 3 weeks, and I feel like they feel like they're a team of destiny, and each week they move on, they just gain more and more confidence. Again, if you like the Eagles, you have to like the over here. 41 is pretty low, and both of these teams can score points. But I would look to get the Eagles at 7 or 7.5. We'll see what happens by Sunday. But boy, 7.5, you got to like the Eagles. Not sure what the weather's going to be like in Chicago, but it seems pretty mild around most of the country. And that should be good enough weather for it not to be an issue. So that's it for NFL games this weekend. And we got one more game on Monday night, and that's the College Football Championship. And it won't take a whole lot to handicap this game. Clemson at Alabama, or versus Alabama. Alabama 5-point favorite. The total's 59. I think as a sports bettor, you just have to take Alabama here at 5 points. I know Clemson has defeated Alabama in the past, but each year it's a different set of players, and the Clemson quarterbacks looked really good last week, but Tua looked good as well. I just think that the Alabama defense is underrated here. Now, 59 is pretty high. You're looking at, a 31-21 game. I don't. That's 52. Both teams would have to score 30 points for this to go over 59, in my opinion. So I like the under there, but I think you got to take Alabama -5. There's just no argument for not taking the favorite. Not taking the favorite here. They kind of let Oklahoma back into the game last week, but they came out and put the hammer down, and it was. And if Clemson's in that situation, they're going to have to abandon that balance between the running and the passing game, and that's kind of where they get their offensive advantage, keeping people off balance between ATN and the passing game. So we'll see what happens there. So before we get to my picks, I just want to talk quickly about one very important piece of local gaming sports betting news. And I got a tweet here from Tom Precious, who covers Albany and all the doings in Albany politics for the Buffalo News. And let me read this here. And it says, Oneida Indian Nation in Central New York signs deal with Caesars Entertainment for sports betting alliance at the tribe's 3 casinos. The tribe's sportsbooks openings are pending rules being issued by the New York State Gaming Commission and the National Indian Gaming Commission review. So basically what's happened is the Turning Stone and its 3 properties, the Turning Stone in Verona and the Yellow Brick Road in Cazenovia and the Point Place, which I believe is in Bridgeport, all have agreed to open sports books with Caesars Entertainment as running the books. And there are a couple of questions here, but there's lots of implications for those of us that are into sports betting. Number one is they will be up and running probably sooner than the state sports books, which include the Del Lago, will be up and running because of the way the laws are written now. And they are waiting on the rules by the New York State Gaming Commission. Sports betting is already legal in New York at the 4 state casinos, which includes the Del Lago and Tioga Downs and a few others. Unfortunately, they can't offer it until the State Gaming Commission releases their rules for sports betting, which they haven't done, and they've dragged their feet on purposely. So as the new legislative session comes in this year in Albany, Governor Cuomo, I believe, is going to request that they do a comprehensive sports betting / fantasy sports bill, because there's a pending court case involving fantasy sports, and I'm not going to get into all that today, but something has to be done, because if they don't do something in the session that ends in June, then you'll have the tribal casinos offering sports betting, and then you'll have the state casinos not offering sports betting, and they'll be losing significant revenue. So there's one other very important factor to all this, and it's called mobile wagering, and that's being able to play sports wagers on your phone. Now, as it stands, because mobile wagering is not legal in New York State, if these sports books did open, they would only be able to offer land-based wagering. You would have to go into the casino to place a wager. It would be the only way you would be able to place a wager. But the good news is if you're close to the Syracuse area or close to the Utica area, you've got sports betting right there. So it's very exciting for all of us here, and it also gives tremendous incentive for the state to get something done and get sports betting right here in Waterloo and other places around the state. So to finish things up, I got my picks for this week, and we're going to start off with 2 wagers on Friday. I'm going to take the Capitals money line plus 100. You got to like the Capitals at home. The Capitals at plus money anytime. They're the cream of the crop in the NHL. And the Ducks at home plus 114. Again, another team that's very undervalued, and they're always competitive. Now that I've said that, they're going to lose by 5. But I'm going to take the Ducks. And then on Sunday, I'm going with the Seahawks. Both of these games, money line. If they both get the 3 at decent odds, I will take them plus 3. But for the show's purposes, we're going to take a money line. Seattle to win outright at plus 112. And the Chargers to win outright at plus 130. And then on Monday night, we've got Alabama minus 5, minus 110. I feel like that's going to end up being a lopsided game. Who knows? But they are the 2 best teams. So we'll see what happens. And that's it for this week. Glad you came to watch. And good luck with your wagers. And let's play the outro music. And let's get some winners. Take care, everybody.